I had an existential crisis about 2 years ago when I questioned the existence of God for basically the very first time. And this is the story of my journey since that moment. Not gonna lie, I'm a bit nervous about this one, guys. Welcome to Passionfroot, where we pursue lives of purpose together. I'm Darcie, and if you're not familiar with me already, I'm an artist. You can probably tell. I'm 3 years out of college now. That's crazy. And coming out of the college years, the whole theme is basically just transition and growth. You know, your 20s can be really confusing, but it's also a time of a lot of growth. And that's certainly been the case for me in many areas of my life. But one of those areas has been my religion, my worldview, my beliefs. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. I was born into a Christian family. I grew up Christian. I went to college, to a Christian college. So I've been in like the Christian bubble for the majority of my life. And coming out of that after graduating from college, I mean, I was on social media and everything, so it wasn't like everything I was consuming was Christian, but all the people I was interacting with and generally all the worldviews I was interacting with of those people, everything was like from a Christian mindset. And the bubble has popped, and I've experienced the bit of culture shock and the questioning and the reframing and deconstruction that comes with that. So this video is for everyone. If you're curious and want to watch, of course you can watch it. But I do hope that with this, I can find some people that have had similar experiences and people who may just want to feel like they're not alone and feel seen. And maybe even some people that are further along in this journey than I am and can even speak to me with words of advice and with stories of their experiences. And again, as you already have gathered, I have a Christian background, so I will be speaking from that perspective. So let me start with what I do not want this video to do. I'm not trying to record and post this video in order to lead by example. I'm not trying to teach anybody. I want to emphasize very strongly that I'm on a journey and I'm still on that journey. And journeys mean that you may make mistakes along the way. You may change opinions along the way. This is a snapshot of where I am right now and a little summary of where I have been, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. My story is far from over. I still have lots of questions. I'm not trying to lead anybody, but hopefully by sharing and being vulnerable, I can help others feel seen and feel like they aren't the only one that's experiencing something like this, because questioning beliefs and deconstructing and reconstructing, it can feel very scary, especially when you first start having those questions. I would love to see this video lead to conversation. If that is what you want it to do, if you have anything to say, please leave that in the comments and we can carry on the conversation. Or feel free to direct message me on social media. You can message us at Passionfroot, or you can message me personally on my own account, all of which I will leave in the description below. I want to open up the floor to continue whatever conversations need to happen from this video. So I want to start with the timeline of what led me to my moment of crisis and then into where I am now on my journey. Just to reiterate, grew up in a Christian bubble. I'm not gonna say that's a good thing or even a bad thing. That's just how my life has been. I think my parents were wonderful people. I'm so grateful for the way they raised me. I have wonderful friends. I have great teachers and mentors who have helped me along the way. I'm not gonna hate on the way I was raised or the way that I was in that Christian bubble. That's just the reality of my life. I went to a Christian college, and so I was still surrounded by those same kinds of people and those same perspectives, that same worldview. And I had maybe like 1 or 2 moments where I questioned God's existence in college, but I just kind of came to decide, you know, if God's real and he loves me, he's not gonna let me lose faith. And so that kind of helped me find peace with that and just trust God that one day he would lead me into full faith and I wouldn't have questions anymore, or at least questions about like his existence. I graduated in 2021 and I realized, you know, now I've kind of left that structure that I was in before, where Vespers and church service and even small groups was part of the culture of my college, and service projects as well. That was all part of the culture. Some of them were enforced. And so I was leaving that structure, and I knew, okay, now I have to stand on my own 2 feet. So I made an effort in 2021, reading Christian literature, reading the Bible, of course, searching for a church to call my home church, trying to make my faith my own as an adult. So maybe towards the end of 2021, maybe at the beginning of 2022, there was this growing frustration with organized religion, with how Christianity often presented itself in culture, in music, in church services, in books, in Christians themselves. From my perspective, I felt like everything just kind of repeated itself and everything was kind of the same. I felt like there was this like Christian blueprint that everything in the Christian world followed. Again, like the people and the things that people said and the types of music that Christians made. And it started to feel kind of claustrophobic and kind of like I wasn't experiencing God for real. I wasn't experiencing a real spiritual connection if I was just to continue following this blueprint. And side note here, as much as it may have its faults because it's a human thing, it's a human institution, I don't want to hate on organized religion because I think it absolutely serves a purpose. Just for me in my life, my personality, the place I was at and am at in my life, I don't know, it started to feel just repetitive and predictable. If I believe that God is God, transcendent, creative, eternal, I just couldn't rectify the two, that having a real connection with God could take place through this very repetitive and well-trodden path, if that makes sense. I felt like there had to be some sort of way to truly connect with God in a way that's unique to me and who I am as a person. And so yeah, I was just getting frustrated with the culture of Christianity. So that's one layer. But the much more serious layer of existential crisis literally started halfway through 2022. I watched this video of a couple of YouTubers talking about their deconstruction, and I related so heavily with their stories, especially one of their stories. I felt like it really paralleled with my life up to a certain point. And I was watching him talk about his story from this point, and I was here and potentially heading towards the point where he was at now, which was that he doesn't believe in God anymore, or at least doesn't know if God exists. And he talked about, having a very strong connection to God, to Jesus, to church throughout all of his life up to that point. I related to that as well, like really trying to be involved in church, really trying to develop a relationship with God, and really feeling like I had, or at least sometimes in my personal experience, sometimes feeling that connection, sometimes maybe not feeling that connection. I related to his story a lot, and it scared me to see that somebody who had been that sincere and that genuine in their relationship with God and their pursuit of Christianity, to see that that person could end up not even really knowing if God exists and being completely out of that world. So I really started asking, how do I know God exists? Does God exist, and does he exist in the way that I've grown up believing he exists, according to the way I was taught, the way the Bible teaches that he exists? If he exists, first of all, is he a God of love and a God of relationship? Does heaven exist? Is he going to bring us to heaven with him? And so that, just questioning that, something that I had taken as truth for my entire life, was upsetting, of course. The other two things that were very upsetting to me in that moment was, first of all, my fear of loss. I definitely have a fear of loss. I think most, if not everybody, does. And for my entire life, I sort of made a peace with the idea of death. It was definitely still something I didn't want to experience, like my family and friends passing away. But I had some sort of peace there because I was always taught that there's eternal life waiting after death. And to seriously question whether that was true or if death really is the end for the people I love, that was one of the scariest things in that moment. The other thing that was really scary, not quite to the same level, but still on the same topic of loss, was if I continue this journey and if I get to a point where I don't believe any of those things anymore, the whole framework of my entire life up till that point, what happens to my community, my family, my friends, this bubble I grew up in? What happens to that if I get to a point where I don't believe any of that anymore? I have wonderful parents. I have wonderful friends. I know they would not just like cut me off or disown me or abandon me. I'm very thankful to have that kind of support in my life. But still, if I were to truly leave that community in terms of what I believe, I just still felt like there would be some sort of distance there that I didn't want to exist there. So that day that I watched that video was really stressful and not fun. Maybe the week or two after, probably the week after, I felt like I was definitely still at that really low point in a funk, just like stressed out because I felt like the floor had just been ripped from underneath me because I was seriously asking these questions for the first time and I didn't have an answer. Weeks, months after that moment, that was still stressful too. I was coming to terms with it a little bit, but I just kind of took a break and I stopped having, like morning devotions. I went to church still because I would go with friends and family, and that was still a sense of community for me and just a habit, tradition I was a part of. I just felt a little bit numb to the whole thing, to Christianity. I knew that I would have to address these questions, this problem at some point, but I just didn't have the energy for it right then. I just had to take a break. But a little bit later in the year, the first, I guess, kind of big milestone of this journey happened, and that is that I found a community that provided me a place to have those questions and still feel like I was accepted and I didn't have to shy away from asking those questions. I found a church that met in somebody's house. My fiance and I started going there regularly. It's provided a good point of connection for me within the Christian community I was raised in, while I'm still doing my own exploration, and I feel safe and accepted with those people knowing that I am exploring and that I am questioning. So moving on, while my certainty about God's existence isn't there right now, I have still been having actually a growing interest in the spiritual need of humans, my spiritual need, my need for spiritual connection. And that exploration has been really exciting. So in 2023, I read 2 books at the beginning of the year. I was actually finishing one of them, and that one was The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. I think that book is actually kind of blowing up right now. I've been seeing people talking about it on social media more and more now, so you might have heard of it already. But if you haven't, take it from me that it's a very, very good book and you should go read it. It's incredible. It's not just for artists, for literally everybody. Anyways, I read that book, finished that book. It's kind of one of the first places where I've directly seen the connection between God and creativity. I was raised, of course, to believe that God is a creative God simply by the fact that He created the world and the universe. And of course, He made me creative, but I never really just fully understood the importance of creativity and the weight that it holds in this world. This book really showed me that connection. It's a great look at creativity through more of a spiritual lens. So that opened up my eyes to how just the very way that I'm a creative person can lead to so much spiritual connection and experiences. The other book that was really important for me at the beginning of 2023 was Devotions by Mary Oliver. I'm in love with Mary Oliver's poetry. She writes about nature in pretty much all of her poems. I would say all of them, except I haven't read all of them, so I guess I can't promise that they're all about nature, but they probably are. Whether it's the nature of the poetry itself or the fact that this book of her poetry was titled Devotions, I really saw a strong connection between her poetry and the idea of prayer. And she talks about prayer in her poetry. And she never considered herself a Christian, but her poetry is just full of God and spiritual connection that she finds through nature. So these two books were extremely refreshing because, let me remind you, my frustration with the structure and blueprint of organized religion or of Christianity was definitely still on my mind. And so it was very refreshing and exciting for me to find ways to experience spiritual feelings and grow spiritually that wasn't just, read your Bible every morning, pray every day, go to church. I think those things are very important. If you're pursuing God in the Christian sense, of course they're very important. But there are ways to approach spiritual experience and a journey towards God that don't involve just those things. And for me, prayer, when I was growing up, it was always like the casual form of prayer, like, Dear Jesus, thank you for this day. Be with whoever, help me with whatever. Or even just not even asking things, but just trying to have a conversation with God. It was that kind of prayer that I grew up with. And that was all that prayer was to me. And now reading poetry opened my eyes to, prayer can look like different things. It doesn't just have to be folding your hands and closing your eyes and just simply talking to God. It can be poetry, it can be song, it can be silence in nature. And a lot of those things were kind of opened up to me largely because of my experience reading Mary Oliver's poetry. I slowly became okay with having questions, and I became more and more comfortable with not knowing. Something that helped me personally with that was taking the idea of heaven and hell off the table. I will share that I grew up believing that hell is not a forever thing. Those who don't accept Jesus, don't accept God, and don't go to heaven are just destroyed with the rest of the world. I don't want to talk about that too much because I think hell is a very triggering concept for a lot of people, and I'm not trying to get into theology here, but I think that is a little bit important for you to understand my story. I did not grow up believing that hell was forever and that it was where people would burn forever. But even then, I would say heaven and making sure you went to heaven and weren't destroyed in hell was still kind of weaponized, whether intentionally or unintentionally, in the religion I grew up in. And so there was still that sense of fear there. I had to take the idea of making it to heaven off the table so that I could truly explore my faith and explore my questions and explore other perspectives instead of being scared to do that and being scared to step off the right path. If a God of love who wants true relationship exists, I think he wants me to truly explore and question things so that I can fully stand on my own 2 feet when it comes to faith and believing him and choosing him. So yeah, I took heaven and hell off the table and leaned into the journey. So that basically brings us up to where I am now. I still can't confidently say I believe in God. I also realize that I'm never going to get to the point where I know for sure. So I can't be relying on knowledge to get me there. But I just feel that I'm not there yet. I'm learning a little bit more than I ever have about what faith is. I do feel like there is something out there that's beyond us. There's lots of religions in the world, and we're all looking at something. I'd like to believe that a lot of us are generally looking at the same thing, just from different perspectives. And so I feel like just the very fact that we have this spiritual need, and we have all these belief systems and these religions that believe in some form of God or other being or other reality, I just really feel like that means something does exist. I know what I want to believe. I know what I want to have faith in. I do love the story of the Bible and Jesus, which is, as I understand it, a story that is purely centered around love. I think that's beautiful, and I really do want to eventually get to a point where I fully have faith in that. I'm also looking at other worldviews and other religions and trying to understand a bit more why they believe, what they believe, and why they believe what they believe. When I say that, I'm not necessarily like going to a different place of worship every week or like really seriously talking to people that believe those things. I wouldn't be against that, but it's more of like reading books, listening to podcasts. I'm doing it in kind of a passive way because I still have a life to live and to balance, and I can't just fully like dive headfirst into this search, but I feel like I'm open to it and I'm open to learning about these things. Honestly, for the past several months, like for all of 2024, religious, spiritual conversations are my absolute favorite kinds to have. I'm just really passionate about that right now, and I think I actually feel more spiritually connected than I ever have as well. Or maybe it just looks different to me now because I am an adult and most of my story has happened when I was a kid and a teenager. But I do think part of that spiritual connection that I'm feeling, it has to do with leaning into who I am as an artist, as a creative person, and figuring out what spiritually fulfills me instead of what I felt was prescribed to me and every other Christian. The same steps that everybody was supposed to follow to develop a relationship with God. I'm exploring what prayer means outside of the casual Dear Jesus kind I grew up with. Poetry, psalms, psalms are poetry, formal prayer. So I grew up in a Protestant denomination that didn't really have much recited prayer. I mean, in church we might occasionally like do a responsive reading or read a psalm, and then we have the Lord's Prayer, which I think is pretty central to most Christian denominations. But beyond that, there wasn't really much formal prayer. And I'm looking at like Catholicism and Orthodoxy and these other denominations that do have that as more of a central part of their worship experience. And I'm just interested in that and exploring that because I wasn't really exposed to it before. Also, I'm finding experiences out in nature where all my senses are just like filled, the rush of breeze through the leaves and the warm sun and the feeling of grass, the sound of birds, this immersive experience. It feels very meditative and prayerful to me. And that's a spiritual experience for me. And also art making, my time in the art studio or my practice with doing a simple little watercolor painting every week or so, that's beginning to feel more and more like a spiritual practice to me. And I'm reading more books as well on creativity. I've been working on The Creative Act by Rick Rubin, which is another popular book right now, so you've probably heard of that. And he talks about creativity in a similar way to how Julia Cameron talks about it. It comes from the source. Julia Cameron, I think both of them actually use that word with capital S. So it's their way of referring to God. And creativity is almost like this living thing that comes from the source and is speaking to all of us. So learning to connect spiritually as an artist has just been really beautiful for me. I've always had a struggle with the idea of hearing God's voice, and many Christians talk about experiences with that, and it feels a little bit alienating when I'm not experiencing that same thing, or I don't feel like I'm experiencing that same thing. And that's something I feel like I've struggled with a little bit for my entire life. But with my new view of creativity as something that is directly related to God, I'm seeing creative inspiration as a form of hearing God's voice. It's not a physical voice in my head. It's not like a strong feeling that I should do this or that, but it's a moment of revelation and energy and creativity. And I've started to just kind of see those moments of inspiration and creative energy as God, whoever God may be, communicating with me. As the cherry on top of my journey right now, I am actually in the process of developing an art show with another artist, and our theme of the show is sacredness and reverence, exploring how art is like a portal between the earthly reality realm and the spiritual realm. Being able to fully dive into that for the past month has been really cool. Art is a great way for me to explore these topics that I'm thinking about and dealing with, and challenges that I experience in my life. Not every challenge. Sometimes if I'm going through something, I can't make any art whatsoever. But this whole question of spirituality and exploring what that is to me just fits so well with my art practice. And the more I look at it, I really see art as something that truly is a door to the spiritual. It's already in church services by, the recitation of prayers and psalms. Poetry is a form of a portal into that reverent experience. Nature, absolutely. I think many people can relate to that experience of going out into nature and feeling like you're connected with something other, something sacred. Music, of course. Music is almost always in every church service and pretty core to, I think, every religion. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure almost every religion has some sort of music that they incorporate into their practice. And people go to concerts all the time and have just this elated experience with the music. And then viewing art, viewing paintings. The Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas, for example, people absolutely have spiritual experiences going there. And then of course for me, like I said, I've discovered that the process of making art and of painting can be a very meditative, reflective, and even spiritual, sacred experience for me. So I'm very excited with where I am now. I'm glad I started asking questions. I sometimes do wish I had a bit more of a firm grip on what I believe, but I'm okay with not knowing that for now, because I'm going to go on this journey at the pace that I need to go on this journey. And I think I have been greatly benefited by going on this journey and exploring religion, faith, sacredness, spirituality, etc., etc., etc. And if you were curious, I do still consider myself a Christian right now, just in terms of labels. I don't really feel the need to change my label as I change my mind throughout time, at least right now. The God I want to believe in is okay with questions. So I'm comfortable here for now. If you are at a point where you feel like you do need to go on a search, on a journey of questioning, I want to encourage you to do that. I think that generally wanting to seek more perspective, wanting to know about what other people and other communities believe, I think that generally is a good and important thing to do, to become a more well-rounded person. And when you do find what you're searching for, when you do find what you believe in, you can have a stronger sense of peace about that belief. We're also just constantly changing and growing. We're learning more every day. We're talking to more people, and growth is inevitable and change is inevitable. Growth is really what life is all about. At the very least, even if you're not questioning your beliefs or you don't feel the need to explore other beliefs, I would still suggest just having conversations with people that believe differently than you or have different opinions. Invite that diversity into your life, because at the very least, I think it grows more compassion and empathy and love in ourselves. And yeah, reading really does open up a lot of doors. It really expands knowledge and perspective. I'm a big reader, and I do highly recommend becoming a reader. I know it's not for everybody, but I think reading is so important, and that's definitely been a way that I've been exploring things in my own life. And you know, we're all unique, we're all different, and I've been finding a lot of connection with God through creativity, because that is so important to me. So whatever that thing is for you, I think there are ways to find spiritual connection that are unique to you. So thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking around to the end of this very long video. I would really love to hear from you. If you have anything you want to say to continue this conversation, feel free to drop it in the comments below or message me personally on Instagram is the best way to reach me, but you know, any social media that I'm on, feel free to drop in and ask questions or just continue the conversation in whatever way you want to. And we will be back here on Passionfroot with another video next week. Have a good week in the meantime, and let's grow together.